I never thought the knock on my front door would sound like a threat. 3 days after my daughter's wedding, I was still recovering. Emotionally, physically, quietly. The flowers from the reception were still fresh in my entryway. I hadn't even taken off the polish on my nails yet. It was supposed to be a peaceful day, tea and paperwork, maybe a long bath. Instead, Brent stood on my porch with a man in a tailored suit. "We're here to discuss your estate," he said, like he was reading from a script. "It's time to put things in order. Now that you're getting older." I didn't answer. I just blinked. That letter, the one I hadn't opened yet, was still in my purse. I could feel it like a stone. I already knew what it said, what Leonard had done before he passed. The number had startled even me. 22 million. Left entirely to me. No one else knew. Not Claire, not even the accountant. Only Leonard and I had held that secret. Now Brent was here. Not as a new son-in-law. Not as family. But as someone who had mistaken my silence for weakness. He stepped forward like he belonged. Claire was behind him, still in her honeymoon glow, smiling like none of this was odd. Like this was just what children did for aging mothers. "May we come in?" the lawyer asked, smoothing his tie. I said yes. I don't know why. Maybe because I was raised to be polite. Maybe because Claire looked so calm, and Brent so certain. Or maybe because part of me needed to see how far they'd go. I offered tea, though my fingers trembled as I poured it. They didn't notice. Brent started talking numbers, retirement plans, long-term care, asset delegation. He talked like I wasn't in the room. Claire nodded like a doll, beautiful, stiff, silent. Then they handed me a paper, power of attorney, my name already typed in bold, Claire's signature neatly inked. Brent had his own signature scrawled at the bottom, like a brand burned into ownership. "Just a formality," Claire said, her voice as soft as a lullaby. I said nothing, and they took that as yes. As Brent's lawyer tucked the folder away and asked about my passwords for future planning, something inside me cracked. Just a hairline. Just a start. But I felt it. They thought I was too old to read the fine print, too alone to say no, but I hadn't even begun to speak yet. The tea was bitter. I don't even remember what kind I served. Probably Earl Grey from the tin Leonard used to keep behind the flour. It didn't matter. My hands shook as I poured, but I managed not to spill. Brent didn't even wait for the tea to steep. He was already flipping through tabs on his tablet. "We can start with consolidating assets," he said. "You've got 3 accounts, right? I've got the routing numbers for 2. Claire said the others under your maiden name." Claire nodded beside him, smiling like she was part of a real estate brochure. Her hands folded primly in her lap, but her eyes didn't meet mine. Not once. "We just want to make sure you're protected, Mom," she said. "Nothing drastic, just organizing, streamlining." She placed a manila folder in front of me with the kind of rehearsed casualness I've only ever seen from people hiding something. The power of attorney was on top, but behind it were pages. So many pages. I saw a living will, banking information, a section for real estate. It was all pre-filled, except for one blank space. My signature. Claire tapped it lightly. "It's just a formality." And I didn't say a word, because the second I opened my mouth, something would crack open. And I wasn't ready for what would spill out. Not rage, not yet, but confusion, pain, the aching realization that this wasn't a misunderstanding. They were orchestrating something. Brent smiled too easily, tapping his fingers against the coffee table like a man who had already won. He leaned back on my couch like it belonged to him. My couch. Leonard's favorite chair sat empty beside him, the indentation from my late husband's weight still softly visible on the cushion. And Brent rested his arm on it like it was part of his kingdom. He turned to Claire. "We'll need that list of passwords." Claire nodded again. "I'll email them to you later, Mom. Or if you want, just write them down now." They were treating me like an obligation, a formality, like a lamp they needed to unplug before moving it into storage. Still, I said nothing, And they mistook my silence as compliance, mistook my stillness for surrender. Claire reached over and gave my hand a gentle squeeze, the kind you give to a child or a widow too tired to fight. But I wasn't tired. Not yet. Not even close. They thought I was just some fragile old woman sitting in a too-big house, clinging to doilies and forgotten memories. But they never saw what I'd survived to get here. Leonard and I built this life brick by brick, sometimes in spite of Claire, not because of her. I remember nights when Leonard came home with grease under his nails, his shoulders heavy with defeat, when our checking account dropped to single digits, and the grocery list had to be rewritten mid-aisle, when the heat went out and we lit candles in the living room, eating soup on the floor like it was a date. He used to say, if you can make it through the hard months, the good years will taste sweeter. He was right. We never had much, not then, but we had grit, faith, and we had each other. I stood by him while he mortgaged every last thing to build his business. I worked nights packing medical supplies just to make rent. I did Claire's homework on the bus when she was sick. I cooked dinner on a camping stove when the gas was shut off. Every setback we turned into something. I didn't realize then that Claire wasn't watching us build. She was waiting for what we'd leave behind. Leonard was always hopeful she'd come back around. But even before he got sick, she'd grown distant, emotionally, physically. Phone calls turned into texts, texts into silence. She didn't ask about the business. She never visited unless there was a birthday. And when she did, she looked around our home like it was a thrift store. "Why haven't you upgraded the countertops?" she asked once. "You could sell this place for a fortune." We didn't care about granite and open floor plans. We cared about the way this house held us, through loss, through illness, through dreams deferred and later fulfilled. Leonard made his final million from a tech buyout that shocked even his lawyer. When he passed, he left it all to me. 22 million. Neatly, quietly, in a sealed envelope. I never told Claire, not because I didn't trust her with the money, but because I no longer trusted her with me. I remember the exact moment I decided to keep it to myself. She was sitting right here, in this room, flipping through her phone while Leonard's breathing machine whirred beside us. "I just wish you'd think about selling," she muttered. "What's the point of keeping it all going if he's not going to?" She didn't finish the sentence. I didn't ask her to. That was the day I stopped offering pieces of myself to people who only showed up with open hands and empty hearts. She had no idea what I'd been left with, and no idea what I still had the power to protect. It was a Saturday afternoon, when I should have been proud. Claire had invited me to her condo to help pick out linens for the wedding registry, but we barely made it through a cup of tea before the questions began. "You've got 3 bedrooms, right?" she asked casually, flipping through catalog pages. "You really only use one, right?" I blinked. "Why?" she laughed. "I'm just thinking, after the wedding, maybe you should consider something simpler, cozier. 1 floor, easier to maintain." She said it like she was offering a favor, like she was helping me shrink myself into a more manageable version of motherhood. I looked around her condo, sleek and white and spotless. No photographs on the walls, not one thing with a story behind it, no fingerprints, no memory, just space. She walked back in holding her laptop. "Also, do you know which bank your insurance is through? Brent says it matters when filing as a secondary beneficiary." I turned my head slowly. "Secondary?" "Don't worry," she said quickly, brushing her hair behind her ear like a teenager caught snooping. "It's just wedding stress. He's just trying to be efficient. Brent. Always Brent. He wasn't even her husband yet, and already he'd trained her to smile when she said unsettling things. Claire used to be sharp. She used to challenge people. But somewhere along the way, she learned that softness, real softness, wasn't profitable. She'd mistaken submission for strategy. I should have said something then. Should have asked her why they were tracking my square footage and checking the policy names on accounts I'd never discussed with her. But instead, I nodded, played the role she assigned me. The helpful, aging mother. The one who would step aside when called to. On the drive home, I kept hearing her voice in my head. "Cozy," she said. Like this house Leonard and I built was too loud, too large, too inconvenient to keep existing. And I realized she wasn't just planning a wedding, she was planning my absence. After Brent's visit with the lawyer, Claire's calls became more frequent, too frequent, but never to ask how I was doing. No, every time the phone rang, it was another gentle request wrapped in practiced concern. Mom, do you remember the password to your life insurance portal? I just want to make sure you've got everything backed up. Have you ever thought about putting your titles somewhere accessible in case there's an emergency? We should talk about updating your contacts. You know, who would speak for you if something happened? Every time she used that same word, if. As if I were already on the edge of being erased. I stood at my kitchen counter one evening, a teacup cooling in my hand, and listened as she asked if I'd considered consolidating my assets. She said the word like she just learned it yesterday and couldn't wait to say it out loud. I told her I'd think about it. And I did. I thought about the way she no longer asked what I was painting. The way she didn't want to hear about Leonard's old business partner visiting last month. The way she never once asked what I wanted. She only wanted what she thought she was owed. I started writing things down after that. Every call, every friendly email with suggestions about reverse mortgages and financial advisors Brent trusted. They were clever, careful. Claire always kept her tone sweet, always left room for plausible deniability. But I knew her voice too well. She wasn't checking in, she was checking the boxes. By the end of that week, she'd asked me for the names of all three of my banks, my pharmacy, and my estate planner. She didn't even pretend anymore. She'd never ask for the money outright. That would be too honest. Instead, she was building a story, one where I was slipping, and they were the heroes catching me before the fall. They were creating the fall. The house was quiet, too quiet. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that feels like something's missing, like something's being stolen one breath at a time. I sat on the edge of my bed, the old quilt Leonard and I picked out on our 23rd anniversary draped over my knees. My feet were cold, but I didn't move. Not yet. The call from Claire that evening had been short, just a sweet reminder to put everything in one place. She meant the documents, the passwords, the proof that I was still a person and not a problem. But after I hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I walked over to the closet, pulled down the worn leather briefcase Leonard had always kept locked, his initials still pressed into the grain like he'd just touched it yesterday. It smelled like cedar and smoke and something solid, something no one could take from me. I sat on the floor and opened it. Bank folders, stock certificates, a copy of the letter with the $22 million valuation, the house deed, a typed will, an old one, still intact, still mine. And as I flipped through those papers, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Anger. Not the kind that burns. Not yet. But the slow, simmering kind that starts in your ribs, the kind that steadies your hand. Because as I looked through every account, every signature, every number, I realized something they hadn't. I still had everything. Every key. Every right. Every penny. Every ounce of legal authority. They were circling, yes. But I wasn't circling the drain. I whispered to myself, just loud enough to make it real. They think I'm a burden. They have no idea who I still am. And in that moment, I made a decision. They'd wanted silence. They were going to get a storm. It was a bright Tuesday afternoon, and I was deadheading roses when Claire pulled into the driveway. She waved like everything was normal, like she wasn't systematically trying to erase me from my own life. The nerve of that kind of calm. It told me everything I needed to know. She'd rehearsed whatever she was about to say. I wiped my hands on my apron as she approached. Thought I'd bring a friend by, she chirped, gesturing to the woman stepping out of the passenger seat. Tall, blonde, clipboard. That kind of softness that makes you second-guess your gut. This is Leanne, Claire said. She's a nurse. We've been talking about how hard it must be to keep up with everything. Just thought maybe a little check-in might help. Leanne smiled. Too warm, too careful. Nothing serious, she added. Just a simple cognitive wellness screen. Lots of people your age do them. especially with all the digital stuff you have to manage now. There it was, the trap. And they set it right in my garden, like I was some confused old woman surrounded by roses she didn't know how to care for. I looked down at the shears in my hand. I'd sharpened them myself that morning. Claire leaned in slightly. "It's just for your peace of mind, Mom. Brent and I have been talking and we're a little worried." I held her gaze and said nothing. Inside, my heartbeat thudded once, hard. So this was the next step. They weren't going to wait for me to get old. They were going to declare it. Leanne pulled a small pamphlet from her bag. "There's a memory prompt section. Just a few questions. I can leave it with you, no pressure." I didn't take it. Claire smiled again, falsely bright. "You don't have to decide now. Just think about it, okay?" I nodded once, slowly, and I watched as the nurse got back in the car, and Claire kissed my cheek like she hadn't just tried to bury me under legal concern and artificial compassion. As they drove away, I didn't go back to my roses. I went inside, and I wrote it all down, word for word, because they weren't assessing my cognition. They were building a case, but I was already 10 steps ahead. I don't know what they expected me to do. Curl up with a blanket and hope they changed their minds? Not likely. I went to book club that Thursday, like I always do. A quiet little gathering at the community center, mostly women in their 60s and 70s, retired teachers, librarians, one retired judge. We argue over Russian novels and drink watery coffee like we're still 20. But that day, I didn't bring a book. I brought a question. I waited until after the discussion, after the group wrapped up their debate over whether Anna Karenina deserved what she got, and caught Nora by the coat rack. Nora, who used to be a family court clerk, sharp as a nail file, kind in the way that cuts through illusion. She lost her husband the same year I lost Leonard. We'd bonded over bad coffee and good silences. When I told her what happened, Brent showing up with a lawyer, Claire bringing a nurse to assess me, Nora didn't gasp or fuss. She just closed her eyes for a long moment and said, "They're prepping a guardianship petition." I stared at her. "What?" "It's a legal move. Happens more than you'd think. They collect a paper trail. Notes, evaluations, anything to suggest diminished capacity. Then they go to court and try to have you declared unable to manage your affairs. Once that's filed, the court freezes everything until it's resolved." I sat down on the bench in the hallway, heart pounding like a war drum. Nora sat beside me. "You're not crazy. You're not imagining this. I've seen it happen. Good people ambushed by their own kids. Once they start the process, it gets ugly, but it's not unstoppable." She reached into her tote bag, pulled out a wrinkled business card, and handed it to me. "This is Meredith Caro, Elder Law Defense. She's dealt with families like this before. You call her." Today, I stared at the name, the embossed print. Claire had a nurse. I had Nora. By the time I left the center that afternoon, I'd made the call. Meredith's office picked up on the second ring. She was brisk, efficient, and had me on her calendar for the very next morning. When I thanked Nora, she waved it off. "You don't owe me anything," she said, "but promise me this. Don't second-guess yourself. You're not the one being unkind. They are." And for the first time in weeks, I believed it. I wasn't spiraling. I was climbing. The investigator wore a windbreaker and didn't talk much. I liked him immediately. Meredith, my new lawyer, had referred him. Said he used to be a detective before retirement, now specialized in high-conflict family disputes, which was just a polite way of saying he's seen the worst of what children do to their aging parents. He called me 2 days after our first meeting, said, "I've got something, you're going to want to sit down." So I sat. He didn't start with Claire, he started with Brent. Because that's where the rot always starts. Not with the child you raised, but with the person they chose to bring into the family, without asking who they'd have to bury to build their future. Brent had gambling debts. Not old ones. Ongoing. He had opened 3 credit cards under an LLC registered in Claire's maiden name. The business he kept referencing, the one they said was a consultancy, was nothing more than a shell. No real income, no clients, just debt and intention. He's been trying to secure funding, the investigator said. using assets he doesn't own yet. He's been presenting your home as collateral in at least 2 conversations with potential investors. I felt my throat close. Your daughter co-signed one of the business applications, he added. She knew. I stared at the phone, numb. Claire knew. She wasn't being manipulated. She wasn't caught in a lie. She was building it with him. I drove past Brent's office later that evening, just sat in my car across the street, staring at the glass building where he played executive in borrowed suits. He didn't earn a cent of what he had. Not the car, not the ring, not the dinners he took Claire to. It was all paid for by someone else. And they'd marked me as the next account. The investigator had also gotten audio. A recording. Brent, on the phone with someone named Paul, talking about my estate like it was already theirs. He called me a soft old sponge full of equity. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at my reflection in the windshield. An old woman, maybe, but not broken, not soft. I pressed save on the audio file and forwarded it to Meredith. Then I turned the ignition and drove away. Because they weren't just trying to take my life, they were trying to erase it. It was raining the morning Meredith called. That soft, relentless drizzle that makes everything feel heavier. Her voice was clipped, controlled, but there was something beneath it. Disbelief, maybe. Rage trying to stay professional. I need you to come in, she said. Bring your copy of the house deed. When I got there, she didn't offer coffee, just opened her laptop and turned the screen toward me. There it was. A trust proposal. A legal draft drawn up by Brent's firm, with Claire's name front and center. Not as a beneficiary, not even as an heir, as a manager of future assets, including anticipated real estate transfers. They had named my home in the trust, listed the square footage, the property value, even included the name of the neighborhood. It was all there, spelled out like I was already gone. Worse, they had sent it to an investor, a friend of Brent's, an investor looking to flip properties for high-end development projects. And in the financial projection section, right there in cold black ink, was a profit margin, based on selling my home within the year. I leaned forward, reading the notes again. They had no shame. Claire's signature was on the cover letter, and under the, quote, timeline of expected execution, they had written, power of attorney in process, evaluations in progress, target acquisition, Q3. My chest burned. I didn't even realize I'd stood up until Meredith reached out and gently touched my wrist. They've made a legal misstep, she said quietly, listing a property they don't own in an investor trust. It's reckless. If this gets to court, it shows intent, premeditation. It helps us. I had a team now. I wasn't standing in my garden alone anymore while Claire brought nurses to my door. I had someone who used the word us. Still, my fingers trembled when I pressed them against the edge of the table. She was going to sell it, I whispered, before I even knew she wanted it. She didn't want it, Meredith said, voice colder now. She wanted the cash. And suddenly I saw it all. Claire walking through my living room with Brent, talking about paint swatches, nursery plans, a future where I didn't exist. I wasn't family anymore. I was a transaction waiting to be processed. But they forgot something. This house doesn't sign itself away. I hadn't used this office in months, maybe longer. Leonard's desk still smelled faintly of varnish and old paper. I sat in his chair, ran my fingers along the grooves he'd worn into the armrest, and took a deep breath. Then I opened the laptop and started dismantling the future they'd tried to build on my bones. First, I moved the bulk of Leonard's inheritance, the full $22 million, into a trust under a new name. One Meredith helped me create. No mention of Claire. No mention of family. Just an anonymous grantor with exclusive distribution rights to herself. Me. Then, I put the house into a life estate. Meredith walked me through every step. The title would reflect that I retain all rights and control until I pass, and after that, it would go to a charitable foundation Leonard once donated to, one Claire's never even heard of. The house was no longer part of the pot they thought they could divide. Next, Meredith scheduled a formal evaluation, with 2 independent physicians of my choosing. A notarized cognitive assessment, IQ, memory, reasoning, language, everything. Public, stamped, filed. No nurse with a clipboard, no whispered suggestions of confusion. This was an iron gate they couldn't lift with any lie. Lastly, I filed a formal document with the county registrar, a declaration of full legal and mental competency. It included the signed statements from both doctors, as well as a letter from Meredith. It wouldn't stop them from trying. But now, every step they took would leave footprints in the mud. Visible, obvious, dangerous. Claire texted that evening. Just checking in, Red Heart. Can we talk soon? I feel like things are getting misunderstood. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't respond. Because they hadn't misunderstood anything. They'd just underestimated me. And I wasn't quiet anymore. I was ready. The table was set like a holiday. Linen napkins, crystal glasses, Leonard's old serving dishes polished until they glowed. The air smelled like rosemary chicken and lemon cake, like hospitality and comfort, just like they remembered. Brent wore that fake casual blazer, the one he saves for networking. Claire showed up in soft pastels, her voice high and sweet, like she was in a commercial for skin cream and redemption. They brought a bottle of wine, labeled Gratitude. I almost laughed, but I played my part perfectly. "Oh, I'm so glad you could come," I said, hands just a little too shaky as I poured the drinks. I even let the word future slip into conversation. Twice, just to watch their ears perk up. When I mentioned getting tired lately, Brent smiled like he'd just heard a starter's pistol. Claire leaned forward, touched my hand. "Mom, we've been so worried. Maybe it's time we talk about next steps." They thought the trap was closing, but it wasn't theirs. It was mine. I'd invited 2 other guests, quietly, carefully, and they arrived right on time. Connie, the estate attorney, and Nora, my retired family court friend, strolled in like it was all part of the plan. "Oh," Claire blinked. "I didn't realize." I smiled warmly. "You know Connie, don't you? And this is Nora. She's been such a help with some recent clarity." Brent looked like he'd swallowed a stone. But I wasn't done. I brought out a folder. Not the real one, of course. Just a decoy, enough to rattle their nerves. Placed it right in the center of the table like a ticking clock. "I've been thinking about my estate," I said, letting my voice tremble slightly. "And I know you both just want what's best for me. So I thought it would be good to talk while everyone's here." Claire reached for her glass too quickly. Brent's knuckles turned white against the tablecloth. Then I looked her right in the eye. "What was that word you used last week?" I asked, tone syrup sweet. "Transition?" She blinked, too fast. "Well, yes, I mean just eventually, when the time comes. And it always does, right?" I said, leaning back. Which is why I had Connie and Nora bring a few things of their own. Just in case. Claire froze. Brent reached for his phone, like he needed to confirm which script they were on. They weren't ready for me to be in control. They thought I'd spent the last month confused. They didn't know I'd been documenting everything, while smiling, cooking, pretending to be the woman they thought they could handle. And the best part? I hadn't raised my voice once. Not yet. Claire had just taken a sip of wine when I set the folder down in front of her. She glanced at Brent, who gave her a nod, small, confident, like a man who thinks he's still 2 moves ahead. But this wasn't chess. It was dissection. "I figured we should discuss this while you're both here," I said, tapping the cover. "You've been so involved with my future, it only seems fair." Claire offered that careful laugh of hers, the one that never quite touches her eyes. "Mom, you don't have to make a big thing out of this. We just want you to be protected." I leaned forward, opened the folder, and slid out the guardianship petition. The one they had drafted. The one they thought I'd never see. The one they were planning to file next week. I placed it gently between the salad tongs and the lemon cake. Claire's smile cracked. Just for a second. "I found this," I said, voice steady. "Already filled out. Already signed. You were going to file it, weren't you?" Brent cleared his throat. "It's not what it looks like." "Then what is it?" I asked, turning to Claire. Because it looks like you were trying to have me declared legally incompetent. It looks like you were preparing to take control of my entire life. Claire opened her mouth, closed it again. Then she tried to pivot. You've been so tired, Mom. You even said— I said I was tired of being manipulated. I interrupted. Silence swallowed the room. Connie sat quietly across from them, her hands folded. Nora, too, unreadable, but alert. Witnesses, every one of them. Real, legal, solid. And then I dropped the final piece. I've had 2 full cognitive evaluations this month, both notarized, both filed. I pulled out the documentation and placed it next to the guardianship petition. Your petition, I added, won't survive a minute in court. In fact, I turned to Brent, it might even be considered fraud. Brent stood suddenly. This is ridiculous. You're turning this into an attack. No, I said, rising too, my hands firm on the table. You did that the moment you filed paperwork behind my back and used my property in investment proposals. Claire's eyes widened. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, I said. You weren't trying to help me, you were trying to replace me. And now, everyone at this table knows it. Brent didn't sit back down. Claire looked at me like I'd turned into a stranger. But I wasn't a stranger. I was the mother they underestimated. The woman they'd tried to silence with wine and paperwork. And I wasn't going anywhere. Brent's face was pale now, that carefully crafted confidence gone. Claire had gone quiet. Too quiet, her hands clasped so tightly I could see her knuckles turning white. I didn't sit down. Because the next thing I had to do, I wanted them eye level for it. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I wasn't going to play this, I said. But then I remembered something. Brent raised his chin. You're making this worse for yourself. I smiled. No, Brent. You did that 3 days ago, when you forgot that even phones can keep receipts. I tapped play. His voice filled the room, crystal clear. Every syllable saturated with arrogance. She's basically a walking ATM. Give it 6 months, we'll redirect the entire estate. Once the guardianship's filed, we just ride it out until she forgets her own name. Honestly, she's practically a vegetable with a signature. Claire gasped, audibly. Like maybe she hadn't heard that one before. The investigator had been thorough. The room was still, the only sound the soft hiss of the phone speaker. You file the petition. I'll handle the investor pitch. We get the house, we get the equity, we clean up the back end before she catches on. Trust me, she won't even notice until the locks change. Brent lunged for the phone. I stepped back. Connie stood. I'd sit down if I were you. Nora? She just watched, calm as a judge, because that's what this had become. A verdict. Claire looked at me with wide eyes. Mom, I didn't know he said that. I didn't flinch. You signed the guardianship petition, Claire. You smiled while he spoke for you. You asked for my bank passwords. You brought a nurse to my front garden to test my memory. Don't insult me by pretending you weren't part of it. The phone stopped playing. Silence. Then Nora, softly, like she was summarizing a deposition. Well, that's going to make probate interesting. Brent looked ready to argue, to spin, to scramble. But the performance was over. This wasn't brunch. This was the execution of a plan. Just not theirs. The next morning, I walked into Meredith's office, wearing Leonard's navy scarf-like armor. She didn't waste time. She had the documents waiting in a neat stack, cease and desist letters for Brent and Claire, legal revocations of every document they'd ever touched, removal notices from my financial records, and most satisfying of all, an amended will. Do you want to read it again before signing? Meredith asked. No, I said. I've already lived it. The pen in my hand felt heavy, but my grip didn't shake. Not like that day on the porch when Brent first showed up with his lawyer. Back when I thought silence would protect me. I signed every page. Claire's name, once printed in bold ink beside phrases like primary heir and durable power, was now absent. Entirely, like a guest struck from a wedding list. Brent's name, of course, had never belonged in the document to begin with. Do you want to inform them officially? Meredith asked. I shook my head. Let the silence speak this time. I revoked every login they might have guessed, changed my banking structure, replaced my medical proxy with Nora, froze the old estate, removed shared access points, changed my emergency contacts, even my voicemail greeting. I cut off the roots they'd been feeding on. They would feel it. Not in a dramatic, door-slamming way. No, this was cleaner, sharper, legal. I didn't yell. I didn't warn them. I just erased them from the plan. The last document to sign was my own declaration, public, notarized, final. I, Evelyn Grace Hartman, of sound mind and full capacity, hereby revoke any former delegation of legal authority granted to Claire Hartman or Brent Whitmore, effective immediately and irrevocably. By the time I stood, I felt taller, lighter, clean, and when I walked out of that office, I didn't check my phone, because there was nothing left they could say. They gambled that I would stay quiet. Instead, I wrote them out of the future. The keys clinked gently in the lock as I opened the front door. The air inside was cooler, quieter, like it had been holding its breath, waiting for me to come back. Leonard bought this place for us years ago, but we never used it. Too many business trips. Too many holidays spent keeping the peace instead of living it. It sat unused for a decade. Until now. Until I needed a place that didn't echo with betrayal. The view from the kitchen window opens to a stretch of pines that turn gold in the morning light. There's a garden out back. Overgrown, yes, but honest. Everything here still needs work. And for the first time in a long time, so do I. But it's mine. Fully. Legally. Quietly. Nora comes by every few weeks, always with rhubarb pie and the latest gossip from the courthouse. She brings laughter back into the house. I let her tease me about my gardening gloves and my bad taste in wine. She says I drink like someone who's never been poor. I say I drink like someone who remembers who tried to take everything from her. Claire still texts, once a week, sometimes twice. Hope you're okay. We didn't mean for things to go this way. Can we talk? She doesn't call me Mom anymore. She says my name now, like she's talking to a stranger she once knew. But I don't respond. Not out of cruelty, but because I no longer accept invitations to pain disguised as reconciliation. I read her messages sometimes and wonder who she thinks she's texting. The woman who sat silently at brunch, hoping not to cause a scene? She doesn't live here anymore. I do. I take morning walks down to the rocky shoreline, coffee in hand, breathing in a life that is mine again. I answer to no one. My accounts are safe. My name is protected. My future is unwritten. And finally, entirely,